Chapter 1. A Fateful Encounter. The stillness of space was shattered by the desperate cry of a dying ship. The TSS Endeavour, once a proud vessel of the Terran Space Alliance, drifted helplessly among the stars, its hull scorched and battered. On the bridge, Captain Nolan Royce gritted his teeth as another explosion rocked the ship. "Report!" he barked, gripping the arms of his command chair. "Shields are down to 20%. Lieutenant Arya Vance called out from the tactical station. "We can't take much more of this." Royce's eyes narrowed as he studied the view screen. The Zorgan warship loomed before them, its angular hull bristling with weapons. They had stumbled upon the alien vessel on the edge of Terran space, and the Zorgons had immediately opened fire without provocation. "Helm! Evasive maneuvers!" Royce commanded. "Get us out of their firing range." The Endeavour lurched as the helmsman, Ensign Kai Tanaka, sent the ship into a dizzying spin. The Zorgan ship matched their every move, relentless in its pursuit. "Captain, we're losing power to the engines," Chief Engineer Lena Sato reported, her voice strained. "We can't outrun them." Royce's mind raced as he considered his options. The Endeavour was no match for the Zorgon ship in a straight fight. They needed to find a way to level the playing field. "Dr. Sato, can you divert power from the weapon systems to the engines?" he asked. Sato hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Yes, sir, but we'll be defenseless." "We're already defenseless," Royce said grimly. "Do it." As Sato worked frantically to reroute power, Royce turned to Vance. "Lieutenant, I need you to target their weapon systems. Aim for the weak points in their hull." Vance's fingers flew across her console as she carried out his orders. The Endeavour's few remaining weapons lashed out at the Zorgon ship, striking vulnerable spots with surgical precision. For a moment, it seemed as though their desperate gambit might work. The Zorgon ship faltered, its weapons fire slackening. But then, with a blinding flash of light, the alien vessel unleashed a massive energy beam that slammed into the Endeavour's hull. Royce was thrown from his chair as the ship shuddered and groaned. Warning klaxons blared, and the acrid stench of smoke filled the air. He pulled himself to his feet, his head spinning. "Damage report!" he demanded. "Hull breach on decks 4 and 5, Vance reported, her voice shaking. "We're venting atmosphere." Royce's heart sank as he realized the true extent of the damage. The Endeavour was crippled, its crew at the mercy of the Zorgons. But even in that moment of despair, he refused to give up. "Tanaka, set a course for the nearest friendly system," he ordered. "We're getting out of here." The helmsman nodded, his fingers racing across his console. The Endeavour's engines flared to life, propelling the ship away from the Zorgan vessel. But even as they fled, Royce knew that their troubles were far from over. As he surveyed the damage to his ship and the haunted faces of his crew, Royce made a silent vow. The Terran Space Alliance needed to be warned about the Zorgan threat, and he would stop at nothing to ensure that humanity was ready to face the challenges that lay ahead. The Endeavour limped through space, its crew battered but unbroken, and though they had escaped with their lives, they knew that the true battle was only just beginning. Chapter 2. A Daring Plan. The Endeavour limped into the Terran outpost of Epsilon Prime, its hull scarred and its crew exhausted. As the ship settled into its berth, Captain Royce wasted no time in seeking out the station's commander, Admiral Ilara Voss. "The Zorgons are a threat we can't ignore," Royce insisted, pacing the length of Voss's office. "We need to act now, before they strike again." Voss leaned back in her chair, her expression thoughtful. "I agree that the Zorgons are a problem, Captain. But the Terran Space Alliance is stretched thin as it is. We don't have the resources for a full-scale war." Royce slammed his fist on the desk, frustration boiling over. "Then we find another way. We can't just sit back and wait for them to pick us off one by one." Voss held up a hand, her eyes narrowing. "I understand your anger, Captain. But we have to be smart about this. We need intelligence, not just brute force. Royce took a deep breath, forcing himself to calm down. Voss was right. They needed a plan, not just blind aggression. "What do you suggest?" he asked. Voss leaned forward, her voice low. "We have reports of a Zorgon supply depot in the Draconis system. It's heavily guarded, but if we could infiltrate it, we might be able to gather valuable information about their technology and their plans." Royce's eyes widened as he considered the possibilities. "It's risky," he said, "but it might be our best chance." Voss nodded. "I can't spare many ships or personnel, but I can give you the Endeavor and a small team of specialists. Choose wisely, Captain. The fate of the Terran Space Alliance may depend on your success." Royce saluted, his jaw set with determination. "I won't let you down, Admiral." As he left Voss's office, Royce's mind was already racing with plans. He knew he would need the best of the best for this mission, and he knew exactly where to start. He found Dr. Lena Sato in the Endeavor's engine room, up to her elbows in grease and wiring. She looked up as he approached, her eyebrows raised. "Captain," she said, "what can I do for you?" Royce smiled. "How would you like to help me steal some Zorgon technology?" Sato's eyes widened, then narrowed. "I'm listening," she said. Royce outlined the plan, watching as Sato's expression shifted from skeptical to intrigued to determined. "It won't be easy," she warned. "Zorgon technology is unlike anything we've ever seen before." Royce nodded. "That's why I need you. You're the best engineer in the TSA. If anyone can figure out how to make their tech work for us, it's you." Sato grinned, wiping her hands on a rag. "Well, when you put it like that, how can I refuse?" Over the next few days, Royce and Sato assembled their team. Lieutenant Arya Vance, the Endeavor's tactical officer, was a natural choice. Her keen eye and steady hand would be invaluable in a firefight. Ensign Kai Tanaka, the helmsman, was young but talented, with a knack for getting into and out of tight spaces. And Dr. Elias Cade, a xenobiologist with a fascination for alien cultures, rounded out the group. As the Endeavor set out for the Draconis system, Royce felt a sense of purpose that he hadn't felt in years. The Zorgons had caught them by surprise once, but this time humanity would be ready, and he would make sure of it. Chapter 3. Into the Lion's Den. The Endeavor dropped out of hyperspace on the edge of the Draconis system, its engines thrumming with barely contained power. On the bridge, Captain Royce leaned forward in his chair, his eyes fixed on the view screen. "There it is," he said, his voice tight with tension. "The Zorgon supply depot." The depot hung in space like a massive, gleaming spider web, its spindly arms stretching out in all directions. Ships of all sizes darted in and out of its docking bays, loading and unloading cargo with mechanical precision. "It's bigger than I expected," Dr. Sato said, her eyes wide. Royce nodded grimly. "And heavily guarded. We'll have to be careful." He turned to Lieutenant Vance. "What's our approach vector?" Vance studied her console, her brow furrowed. "There's a small gap in their sensor net, sir. If we come in at a low angle and cut power to all non-essential systems, we might be able to slip through undetected." Royce nodded. "Make it happen." The Endeavor glided towards the depot, its hull barely reflecting the starlight. As they drew closer, the sheer scale of the structure became apparent. It was like a small city floating in space, bustling with activity. "I'm picking up a lot of comm chatter," Ensign Tanaka reported from the helm. "It sounds like they're preparing for a big shipment." Royce leaned forward, his interest piqued. "A shipment of what?" Tanaka shook his head. "I can't tell, sir. The transmissions are heavily encrypted." Sato looked up from her console, her eyes gleaming with excitement. "If we can get our hands on that shipment, it could give us a major advantage." Royce hesitated, weighing the risks. They were already taking a huge gamble by infiltrating the depot. Trying to steal a shipment would only increase the danger. But Sato was right. The potential payoff was too great to ignore. "All right," he said finally. "We'll stick to the original plan, but keep an eye out for that shipment. If we get a chance to grab it, we take it." The team nodded, their faces set with determination. They knew the stakes were high. If they were caught, they would be killed, or worse. But they also knew that the fate of the Terran Space Alliance hung in the balance. They had to succeed, no matter the cost. As the Endeavour slipped into the depot's docking bay, Royce felt a sense of unease wash over him. The bay was eerily quiet, with no signs of the usual bustle of activity. Something wasn't right. "Stay sharp," he warned, his hand resting on his sidearm. "This could be a trap." No sooner had the words left his mouth than all hell broke loose. Alarms blared, and blast doors slammed shut, sealing them in. Zorgon soldiers poured into the bay from all sides, their weapons trained on the Endeavour. "We've been made!" Vance shouted, her fingers flying over her console. Royce gritted his teeth, his mind racing. They were outnumbered and outgunned. Their only chance was to fight their way out and hope they could make it back to the ship. "Sato, Cade, get to the engine room and see if you can give us some more power," he ordered. "Vance, Tanaka, you're with me. We'll hold them off as long as we can." The team sprang into action, their training and instincts taking over. Royce led the charge, his weapon blazing as he carved a path through the Zorgon soldiers. Vance and Tanaka followed close behind, their own weapons adding to the chaos. But even as they fought, Royce knew it was only a matter of time before they were overwhelmed. The Zorgons just kept coming, wave after relentless wave. They needed a miracle. And then, just when all seemed lost, the miracle came. The blast doors on the far side of the bay exploded inward, revealing a sight that made Royce's heart leap with hope. There, standing amidst the smoking wreckage, was a figure he had never expected to see again. "Captain Nolan Royce," the figure said, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Looks like you could use a hand." Royce stared in disbelief, hardly daring to hope. But there was no mistaking that voice, that cocky grin. "Jake Brennan," he said, a grin of his own spreading across his face. "I never thought I'd be so glad to see your ugly mug." Brennan laughed, hefting his weapon. "I was in the neighborhood and thought I'd drop by. Now what do you say we show these Zorgon bastards what happens when you mess with the Terran Space Alliance?" Together, Royce and Brennan led the charge, their weapons blazing as they fought their way back to the Endeavour. Sato and Cade had managed to coax more power out of the engines, and the ship surged forward, blasting its way out of the depot and into open space. As they made their escape, Royce couldn't help but marvel at the turn of events. Just when he had thought all was lost, an old friend had appeared out of nowhere to save the day. It was a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there was always hope. But as the Endeavour sped away from the Draconi system, Royce knew that their troubles were far from over. The Zorgons would be coming for them now, with everything they had. And if humanity was going to survive, they would need every ounce of ingenuity and courage they could muster. The fight was just beginning. Chapter 4: Secrets and Revelations. The Endeavour limped back to Epsilon Prime, its hull battered and scorched from the narrow escape at the Zorgon supply depot. Captain Royce sat in his quarters, his mind racing as he tried to make sense of what had happened. The sudden appearance of Jake Brennan had saved their lives, but it had also raised more questions than answers. A chime at the door interrupted his thoughts. "Come in," he called, straightening in his chair. The door slid open, revealing Dr. Sato. She looked exhausted, her face smudged with grease and her hair in disarray, but there was a glint of excitement in her eyes. "Captain," she said, her voice barely containing her enthusiasm, "I think I've found something." Royce leaned forward, his interest piqued. "What is it?" Sato held up a small, metallic object. It was no larger than a deck of cards, but it seemed to pulse with an inner light. "I found this in the shipment we managed to grab from the depot," she explained. It's like nothing I've ever seen before. The technology is incredibly advanced. Royce took the object, turning it over in his hands. It felt warm to the touch, almost alive. "What does it do?" he asked. Sato shook her head. "I'm not entirely sure, but from what I can tell, it seems to be some kind of power source, and not just any power source. This thing could revolution—" Her voice trailed off as the intercom crackled to life. "Captain Royce, please report to the bridge immediately." Royce frowned, handing the object back to Sato. "Keep working on it," he said. "I have a feeling this is going to be important." He made his way to the bridge, his mind still churning with the implications of Sato's discovery. But as he stepped through the doors, he was greeted by a sight that drove all other thoughts from his mind. There, on the view screen, was a Zorgon warship. It hung in space like a predator, its weapons aimed directly at the Endeavor. "They followed us," Lieutenant Vance said, her voice tight with tension. "They must have tracked us from the depot." Royce gritted his teeth, his mind racing. They were in no shape for another fight, not after the beating they had taken at the depot. They needed time to regroup, to come up with a plan. "Hail them," he said, his voice calm despite the pounding of his heart. Vance nodded, her fingers flying over her console. A moment later, the view screen flickered, and the image of a Zorgon commander appeared. It was a fearsome sight, with its scaly skin and razor-sharp teeth. "Terran vessel," it hissed, its voice dripping with menace. "You have stolen from us. Return what you have taken, or be destroyed." Royce stepped forward, his chin held high. "I'm afraid I don't know what you're talking about," he said, his voice steady. "We have taken nothing from you." The Zorgon commander snarled, its eyes narrowing. "Lies! We know you have taken our technology. You will return it or face the consequences." Royce's mind raced, trying to come up with a way out of this. They couldn't give up the power source, not when it could be the key to defeating the Zorgons, but they couldn't fight either. They were outmatched and outgunned. Suddenly the ship shuddered as something slammed into its hull. Alarms blared and warning lights flashed. "Report!" Royce barked, gripping the arms of his chair. "We're being boarded!" Vance shouted, her eyes wide with horror. "They're coming in through the cargo bay!" Royce felt a surge of fear, but he pushed it down. He had to stay calm, had to think. "Seal off the cargo bay," he ordered. "And get Brennan up here. We need all hands on deck." As the crew scrambled to carry out his orders, Royce turned back to the view screen. The Zorgon commander was gone, replaced by the image of the warship bearing down on them. "Come on, you bastards," Royce muttered under his breath. "Come and get us." The ship shuddered again as the Zorgons continued their assault. Royce could hear the sound of weapons fire echoing through the halls, the screams of his crew as they fought for their lives. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the attack stopped. The ship fell silent, save for the blaring of alarms and the hiss of escaping air. Royce frowned, his heart pounding. Something wasn't right. The Zorgons wouldn't just give up like that. They had to be planning something. "Sato," he said, his voice urgent. "Tell me you've made some progress on that power source." Sato's face appeared on the view screen, her expression grim. "I think I have, Captain, but you're not going to like it." Royce leaned forward, his brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" Sato hesitated, as if choosing her words carefully. "The power source, it's not just a power source, it's a weapon, a doomsday device, capable of wiping out entire planets." Royce felt a chill run down his spine. A weapon of that magnitude, in the hands of the Zorgons, it was unthinkable. "We have to destroy it," he said, his voice firm. "We can't let the Zorgons get their hands on it." Sato nodded, her face pale. "I agree, Captain. But there's something else you should know." She paused, as if gathering her courage. The power source. It's not Zorgon technology. It's Terran. Royce felt as if the floor had dropped out from under him. Terran technology? But how? And why? He didn't have time to ponder the implications. The ship shuddered again, harder this time. The Zorgons were renewing their attack. "Sato, find a way to destroy that thing," Royce ordered, his voice grim. "The rest of you battle stations. We're not going down without a fight." As the crew scrambled to their stations, Royce couldn't shake the feeling that they were on the brink of something much larger than they had ever imagined. The Zorgons, the power source, the secrets and lies, it was all connected somehow. And he had a feeling that before this was over, they would all be tested in ways they had never been tested before. Chapter 5: Betrayal and Sacrifice. The Endeavor was in chaos. Zorgon soldiers swarmed through the ship, their weapons blazing as they cut down anyone in their path. Captain Royce and his crew fought back with everything they had, but they were outnumbered and outgunned. In the engine room, Dr. Sato worked frantically to find a way to destroy the Terran power source. She knew that if the Zorgons got their hands on it, it would mean the end of everything they had fought for. Suddenly, the door to the engine room burst open and Jake Brennan stumbled in, his face pale and his eyes wild. "Lena!" he gasped, his voice ragged. "You have to help me!" Sato looked up, her brow furrowed. "What's going on, Jake? What's happening out there?" Brennan shook his head, his hands trembling. "It's a massacre. The Zorgons. They're everywhere. We can't hold them off much longer." Sato felt a chill run down her spine. If the Zorgons took the ship, they would have everything they needed to conquer the galaxy. "We have to destroy the power source," she said, her voice firm. "It's the only way." Brennan nodded, his jaw clenched. "I know, but there's something else." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, metallic object. It was the same power source that Sato had been studying, the one that had caused so much trouble. "I took it," Brennan said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I thought I could use it to bargain with the Zorgons, to buy us some time." Sato's eyes widened in horror. "Jake, what have you done?" Brennan shook his head, his face twisted with anguish. "I didn't know what it was, Lena, I swear. I just wanted to protect the crew, to protect you." Sato felt a surge of anger, but she pushed it down. There would be time for recriminations later. Right now, they had to focus on stopping the Zorgons. "Give it to me," she said, holding out her hand. "I'll take care of it." Brennan hesitated, his eyes searching her face. "Lena, Suddenly the ship shuddered violently, throwing them both to the floor. Alarms blared and warning lights flashed. "The Zorgons have taken the bridge." A voice crackled over the intercom. "All hands, prepare to repel boarders." Sato grabbed the power source from Brennan's hand and shoved it into a nearby console. Her fingers flew over the controls, her mind racing as she tried to find a way to overload the device. "Lena, what are you doing?" Brennan asked, his voice tight with fear. "I'm going to blow this thing to hell," Sato said, her jaw clenched, "and take the Zorgons with it." Brennan's eyes widened in realization. "You can't. The explosion, it'll destroy the ship." Sato nodded, her face grim. "I know, but it's the only way to stop them." She turned to Brennan, her eyes blazing with determination. "Get to an escape pod. Get as many of the crew as you can. I'll stay here and finish this." Brennan shook his head, his eyes filling with tears. "No, I won't leave you." Sato grabbed his face, pulling him close. "You have to. The crew needs you. The Terran Space Alliance needs you." She kissed him, hard and desperate. "I love you, Jake. I always have." Brennan clung to her, his body shaking with sobs. "I love you too, Lena. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Sato pushed him away, her face set with resolve. "Go, now." Brennan hesitated for a moment, his eyes locked on hers. Then he turned and ran, his footsteps echoing through the empty corridors. Sato turned back to the console, her fingers flying over the controls. She could hear the sounds of battle raging outside, the screams of the dying and the roar of weapons fire. She thought of Captain Royce and the rest of the crew, fighting for their lives against impossible odds. She thought of Jake, racing to save as many as he could. And she thought of the Terran Space Alliance, the fragile hope for humanity's future. She would not let the Zorgons destroy that hope. She would not let them win. With a final defiant cry, Sato slammed her hand down on the console. The power source began to glow, brighter and brighter, until it was almost blinding. And then, with a roar that shook the very foundations of the universe, the Endeavor exploded in a brilliant flash of light. On the bridge of the Zorgon warship, the commander watched in disbelief as the Terran vessel vanished in a ball of flame. They had been so close to victory. But even as the commander raged and cursed, a small fleet of Terran ships dropped out of hyperspace, their weapons already firing. The battle was joined, and the fate of the galaxy hung in the balance. But the crew of the Endeavor had given them a fighting chance. They had sacrificed everything to protect the Terran Space Alliance, to protect the future of humanity. And as the battle raged on, their memory would live on, a shining beacon of hope in the darkness of space. Chapter 6: The Final Stand. In the aftermath of the Endeavor's destruction, the Terran Space Alliance reeled from the loss of one of their most celebrated ships and its valiant crew. But even in their grief, they knew that the fight was far from over. The Zorgons were still out there, and they would stop at nothing to conquer the galaxy. On the bridge of the TSS Valiant, Admiral Ilara Voss stood tall and resolute, her eyes fixed on the viewscreen. Around her, the crew worked frantically to prepare for the coming battle. "Status report!" Voss barked, her voice cutting through the chaos. "The Zorgon fleet is approaching, Admiral," Lieutenant Commander Reese Madsen replied, his fingers flying over his console. "They'll be within firing range in 10 minutes. Voss nodded, her jaw clenched. "And our fleet?" Madsen hesitated, his face grim. "We're outnumbered, Admiral. The Zorgons have us 3-1. Voss closed her eyes for a moment, the weight of her responsibility pressing down on her like a physical force. She thought of Captain Royce and his crew, of their bravery and sacrifice. She would not let their deaths be in vain. "We'll just have to even the odds," she said, her voice like steel. "Prepare to engage." As the Terran fleet surged forward to meet the Zorgons, Jake Brennan sat in the cockpit of his fighter, his hands trembling on the controls. He had barely escaped the destruction of the Endeavor, his heart shattered by the loss of Lena Sato and the rest of the crew. But even in his grief, he knew that he had a job to do. He had to protect the Terran Space Alliance, to ensure that their sacrifice had not been in vain. "All fighters, engage the enemy," Admiral Voss's voice crackled over the comm. "Let's show these bastards what happens when you mess with the Terran Space Alliance." With a roar of engines, the fighters streaked towards the Zorgon fleet, their weapons blazing. The battle was joined, and the fate of the galaxy hung in the balance. For hours, the two fleets clashed in the cold void of space, their ships dancing a deadly ballet of destruction. The Terrans fought with everything they had, their courage and determination a match for the Zorgons' superior numbers and technology. But even as they fought, Brennan couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The Zorgons seemed to be holding back, as if they were waiting for something. And then, with a sickening lurch, he realized what it was, the power source, the one that Lena had tried so desperately to destroy. The Zorgons must have recovered it from the wreckage of the Endeavor. "Admiral!" Brennan shouted over the comm. "The Zorgons have the power source. They're going to use it against us." For a moment, there was silence on the other end of the comm. Then Admiral Voss's voice crackled to life, her tone grim. "All ships, fall back to the rally point. We need to regroup and come up with a plan." As the Terran fleet retreated, Brennan felt a sense of despair wash over him. They had fought so hard, sacrificed so much, and now it seemed like it had all been for nothing. But even as he fought back tears of frustration and grief, a memory surfaced in his mind. A memory of Lena, her face set with determination as she worked to unravel the secrets of the power source. "It's not just a weapon," she had said, her eyes blazing with excitement. "It's a key to unlocking the secrets of the universe." And with a sudden blinding clarity, Brennan knew what he had to do. "Admiral," he said, his voice steady and calm, "I have an idea, but I need your trust." There was a moment of silence. Then Admiral Voss's voice crackled over the comm. "What's your plan, Brennan?" Brennan took a deep breath, his heart pounding in his chest. "I need to get close to the Zorgon flagship, close enough to use the power source against them." "What?" Voss's voice was sharp with disbelief. "That's suicide, Brennan. The power source is too dangerous. We can't control it." Brennan shook his head, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "No, Admiral. We can't control it, but we can guide it." He thought of Lena, of her brilliance and her bravery. He thought of Captain Royce and the crew of the Endeavor, of their sacrifice and their courage. And he knew, with a certainty that went beyond words, that this was what he was meant to do. "Trust me, Admiral," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "This is the only way." For a long, agonizing moment, there was silence on the other end of the comm. Then Admiral Voss's voice crackled to life, her tone filled with a quiet, fierce pride. "Godspeed, Brennan, and thank you." With a final defiant roar of engines, Brennan streaked towards the Zorgon flagship, the power source clutched tightly in his hands. He could feel its energy pulsing through him, a wild, untamed force that threatened to tear him apart. But even as the pain racked his body, he felt a sense of peace wash over him. This was his destiny, his final stand. And as the power source detonated in a blinding flash of light, engulfing the Zorgon flagship in a maelstrom of energy, Brennan knew that he had succeeded. The Terran Space Alliance was safe. The galaxy was free. And though he would never know it, his name would be remembered for generations to come. A hero, a legend, the savior of the stars.